Call me, D.
The intruders would eventually leave the house with less than what they thought they'd get, leaving Peaches and the rest of the family to clean up the mess. They all check on each other, consoling one another, making sure everyone was okay. The police would never come, but there wasn't a need for them anymore because at this point, they couldn't tell who did it if they wanted to. Being that they themselves, which was a house full of females, were held by the same street code of ethics as the guys who just left their home, which made any and all players who picked up the sticks fair game. But this also wasn't the first time someone ran inside Miss P's home looking to stick the place up. When the first ordeal took place, the daughter of their cousin Pumpkin would be maced by one of the intruders. So by now they were aware of the consequences, but by living a hard life itself would motivate them to still take on the risk. Now in both instances, Peaches was hustling hard, all for it to be taken by someone else. But see, they had to depend on another person's hustle, while Peaches could always bank on herself. They could take the money, but could never take Peaches' hustler spirit. Now it was just a few weeks away before Peaches would have her baby, and she had every intentions on being the best mother that she could be. Early on, she would work at places like Twin Value, which was similar to a Walmart, a big Kmart, but the real payday for Peaches would come after really getting into selling weed. But it wasn't just something to do this go around. She'd really dive in head first. Her grandmother had built something of a weed enterprise, and her descendants would all reap the benefits. So even through illegal means, it fed the house for a good amount of years, getting to the point where they would all have their own pack to sell. It being so much clientele, everyone had an opportunity to get it. So the only way that you didn't was if you didn't want to. And Peaches want no green bean, no goofy or some secondhand wannabe weed man up the block that you could short every day. She was stumped down as they came. And unless your money was all the way straight down to the dollar, you ain't getting now bud from Shaletha Yvette Perry. So if the year 1998 itself isn't nostalgic enough for you, this was the times of nicks, dimes, and $5 hollers. A quarter of weed was still going for the sweet price of $25. And there she was, stashing away her money every chance she got. And eventually, she saved upwards to about $3,000 to $4,000. Now that amount of money today could honestly be someone's rent for the month. But to a 16, 17 years old in 1998, it was considered a nice chunk of change. At this time, her mom had a duplex house on 149th Street, and Peach's plans were to renovate the basement of her mother's home, attempting to turn it into her own space. She paid in advance to have it done before the baby was delivered. But unfortunately, the job was poorly done, having a shaky foundation, and was just overall incomplete. So with that not working out, she stayed at her grandmother's house with the rest of the girls until she had the baby, which was May 9th, 1998, naming him Brian. But even with all that effort put into her and her baby's future, it gave off the impression that she would definitely become the mother she was striving to be.
With her grinding like that and being conscious and setting up for her and her baby's future and everything, you just knew this child was about to be a good mother. You hear me? She paid the money to get the basement fixed up and everything. And once everything was said and done, it ended up not working out. It never came to fruition.
But Peaches would start to display a bit of questionable behavior as far as raising her child. You could tell she didn't have a lot of patience. She'd rather not deal with dirty diapers, and she didn't like the sight of blood. All basic battles that all parents have to endure at some point. But as of now, it wouldn't stand out. It wouldn't pass the point of concern until she moved into her own spot. And this is where the cracks in her motherly role will reveal itself. Now I want to set a scene for you, because by now we're stepping into the year 2000. And us 90s babies definitely remember the new millennium in any city we resided in. But for Cleveland, Ohio, this was a city with a declining population, a median household income that was below the national average, and a high poverty rate that made up of most of the black communities. But we've had generations after the other to adapt to this hard truth. So to the less fortunate, it was seen as another day in Cleveland, Ohio. Because just as struggle was on the rise, so was the music. The era of baggy white tees, throwback jerseys, head and wristband combos, and Nokia phones was just kicking off in the same way Peaches and Nikki grew up in the crack epidemic. As kids, they would live out their own era and time in two totally different ways. Now just to be clear, this is a story about Shaletha Yvette Perry, but we also know that your own addiction and life struggles doesn't just affect you, it affects everyone close to you, and it would affect her big sister Nikki the most. Peaches is 19 to 20 years old, and she'd moved into her own place through her mom's boyfriend, Mother, who had an empty apartment above hers on 148th in St. Clair. The 48 is what they called this street, but this was one of those blocks that we call today live, turn, or bussin'.
And the 48 was one of them streets that was jumping always. This is where she gets pregnant with my second nephew. Now, living on this street is where everything was starting to get progressively worse. Because now you have these two small kids and you looking outside, everybody is kicking it. It's hot. It's the summer. You seeing niggas pull up in cars. And I think my sister felt like she was missing out.
Now, to give you a bit of context, Peaches always had an addictive personality, and in general that just means she's possessed certain personality traits which made her more prone to addiction more than others. From a different perspective, it could be seen as a gift and a curse. Now, there comes a day she makes way into the house, groceries in hand, with her son not far behind. As she's putting bags away, Brian drops his bag of candy, which then rolled off the porch, and the barely walking 2-year-old follow right behind them, falling in the process. It scared her to death. She was frantic, but fortunately, he would have not a scratch on him. But it would be Peaches' reaction that made the situation the more serious. Because the once concerned Peaches was now angry and frustrated, and that anger prompted her to whip her 2-year-old, basically on the grounds of him scaring her that much. A situation her sister felt was definitely over the top. Now, a while down the line, Peaches is unable to pay rent, so ultimately she moves in with her big sister Nikki and her child's father on 129th Street in St. Clair. But the behavior worsens. Her patience was even thinner, and one day it passed the point of over the top for them. Little Brian, who's now at the stage of extreme curiousness, snatches off his diaper, so whatever was inside is now on the floor. But Peaches, already pissed off, whips him, and whips him bad.
He was 2 at the time. He a baby. And I can remember she just whooped his ass. And every time she thought about it, she would whoop him again. And she would whoop him again. And it got to the point where my kid's father said, Peaches, if you hit that baby one more time, I'ma whoop your motherfucking ass.
And a still angry Peaches raged about the ordeal, unable to see just how much damage she was causing. But the behavior wouldn't let up, and she would start doing other questionable things that wouldn't sit right with her sister. Now, Nikki, who's an opposite, but had 3 children to feed, so her free time to go out, party, and have fun were very limited. Knowing this, Peaches would take advantage of the situation sometimes by leaving her kids with Nikki to go out. There were days Nikki was designated nanny involuntarily, with Nikki going to the bathroom one moment, and upon her return out, Peaches was gone. And this wasn't for just a few minutes, a couple hours. Sometimes it would be up until the next day. Stumbling in, pissy drunk from yesterday's festivities, without a regard for the 2 little boys she had back home. And this ended up being the norm for Nikki, holding herself to an unwritten code of honor and loyalty toward her sister, Peaches. But like anyone, the pressure would weigh her down as time goes on. Later in the year, Peaches would stay in constant conflict with her mother, getting into physical fights more than often, the police being called to the apartment, and this would only get social services involved. Now, because of Nikki's previous experience with Child Protective Services, she knew that this could not only hurt Peaches, but it could benefit her as well, depending on how she handled it. So after Nikki's children were sent to live with her aunt for 4 months, her kids were returned. This was after completing everything they required her to do. They would even help her out with a clothing voucher for her children, got the kids new beds, a new stove, refrigerator, really helping out in a major way. And Nikki's case was soon closed, thus leading Nikki to believe that Child Protective Services was only a threat to those who didn't take care of their responsibilities as a parent. So as time goes on, sometimes things were up and sometimes they were down for her, till she found another place of her own on 158th in St. Clair in the year of 2003. And there were 2 apartments placed over 2 businesses, and Nikki's was above an active barbershop, while her cousins occupied the apartment across from her. So being that it was all relatives that lived inside this building, their doors were unlocked majority of the time. And as before, even though Peaches' kids were there, she was still absent most days, leaving her big sister to bear the responsibility. But this duty weighed on Nikki, and it becomes even heavier to bear when Peaches would do the unthinkable.
My sister would do things like leave my nephew's stroller in the hallway with him in it and just bounce. And I open the door. My damn nephew's is outside my door. They couldn't get outside because the downstairs door was locked. You couldn't get in it. So if either way, either my grandmother was going to let them in or I was going to let them in.
By now, Peach's alcohol consumption was at a full throttle. Beer would be Peach's main vice from here on out. And Nikki was at the end of her rope, and she was concerned for not just her sister, but those babies as well. And she battled with the thought of making a specific decision for a while. But the choice she'd soon make would have an adverse effect on Peaches. And that was calling CPS to report her sister's neglect. Now granted, you may say it's wrong, disloyal, or low to do such a thing. But if you had to wear those shoes Nikki walked in during this time, what are your real options at this point? So when Nikki made the call, she just knew in the back of her mind, she was doing the right thing. The hard sight of seeing her nephew's diaper dragging the floor most days, which he would have on so long that the gel would separate from the inside. The snotty noses, dirty clothes, the lack of bathing her children on a regular basis. So more than anything, she felt it was her duty to do something about it, as a sister and an aunt.
It got to the point, I'm like, you know what? She need help. This can't keep going on. So I battled with it for a while. Now, mind you, my sister already had a case with social services. So in my mind, they gonna help her. She gonna get her shit together. She gonna get a place and all will be well. Boy, was I wrong.
The day CPS would come pick the kids up, they were ages 2 and 5 years old, and Peaches just so happened to be there at the time. Nikki watched her sister as she angrily walked around gathering up her children's things and felt that Peaches had every right to be mad with her, but she stood firm on her decision, telling Peaches that she really needed this. Nikki would still hold on to some ounce of hope that the kids wouldn't be gone long, but that adverse effect that we spoke about earlier in the story makes itself truly known. So instead of Peaches taking this new reality serious enough to get it together, she would take the perspective of a mother with permanent child care for her children. In her mind, she can now do what she wanted whenever she wanted. So even with her newfound freedom, this is when reality would hit Peaches the hardest as she takes a full-on nosedive into her addictions. Her mother would try and gain custody of her children to at least have them around family, but because of Peaches' strained relationship with her mother, she prevented any and all family members from doing so. And as time flies by, almost up to 2 years, there was only one thing Peaches made an effort to do, which was supervised visits with her children. The only good came out of this situation was the kids not being pushed throughout the system, bouncing from one foster home to another. There was a great family who wanted kids of their own and ended up adopting them both so not to split them up. Peaches wouldn't see her children for the next 11 years.
I can remember the guilt that I felt when doing it. I thought I was doing the right thing because of my experience.
It's the year 2004. A few years after the CPS situation, Peaches went through everything a person could bear inside the streets. Depression and addiction had a hold on her with no plans of letting go anytime soon. And by this time, the depression was very noticeable on Peaches. Yes, she's had her freedom of not worrying about her kids, but you could still tell that losing her kids was the worst that could happen for her. It's all she would talk about, especially when she was drunk. She would fall off a bit, get back up, fall off, and the same again. There were little spurts in time where she would try and climb her way out of that darkness, but no branch to grab a hold on to finish the job. After a while, Peaches would find an apartment off Terrace Street on the east side of Cleveland. This was one of those low-income buildings where a lot of older folks with Social Security benefits lived. And inside this place, anything went. And you could find anything from weed up to heroin. Now there comes a time where there were rumors brewing around the neighborhood about Peaches. And one day, the rumor found its way back to Nikki's doorstep. And that rumor would be Peaches using crack cocaine. And just hearing that for the first time, Nikki just knew this was a lie. Didn't even consider it being truth-worthy. So life goes on. Nikki's living her life, and so is Peaches. But she would indeed hear it again. But still, she refuses to believe it.
Somebody came up to me, "Oh, Nikki, man, hey, I ain't being funny. I hear your sister smoking that." And I'm like, "Smoking what?" And they told me, I'm like, "Man, go ahead on, man. You know, Peaches, she a drink. She ain't, not my sister. Hell no."
A very notable guy in the neighborhood, and his name, Tone. He was one of the few solid guys who wasn't considered the messy type. He got a lot of love and respect among the people, and for years, Nikki has never known this guy to play with lies, especially about something this serious. So now, her attendance is up. It's setting in that her little sister could actually be doing this. But that day did come, where everything was clear cut and dry for her.
I never told nobody, but not too long after that, my mother was upset with her about something, and my mother was ranting and raving. You know how you talk out loud about somebody, but not to them? My mother walking around, yeah, mother wanna walk around mad at me and talking, and I'm trying to help her, and you drop your bag of clothes, and the mother stem fall out. And I remember hearing that, and everything made sense.
With everything they've witnessed growing up in the crack epidemic, she thought that'd be the one thing neither one of them would touch. And Nikki, she would inquire about it to Peaches one day. It was the depression from her kids being gone, and she just wanted the pain to go away. Which leads into Peaches blaming her sister for everything, deeming her the sole reason for her children's absence. But Nikki, as she did then, had to stand firm on her tough love towards her sister. So it sets in stone that this is her lifestyle now, and no amount of help from anyone could change that no time soon. Now, while living life in this new environment, Peaches was living a bit reckless, putting herself in dangerous situations at times. Wouldn't be long before she runs into a little problem. But it's one of those problems she was used to dealing with even as a little girl. Since the day that she broke that little girl's hand in elementary school, she's always been known as a fighter. But as much as a lion that she was at heart, size was still a factor out in them streets. She was standing at 4 feet 10, 130 to 40 pounds. So it was still a possibility that things could get a little scary for Peaches. Then she would get onto an elevator one day, and out of nowhere, another woman comes in and punches her in the mouth, knocking out her 2 front teeth in the process.
What the is going on? Peaches, you ain't never been no. What the happened? You let that hoe do that? And that's how I knew my sister wasn't the same. When they got the opportunity to get on no elevator to say anything to her before she was on their ass like white on rice.
Nikki would say this situation showed her just how much the drug use had changed her sister. Up until now, she's never seen her lose a fight, or back down for one, for that matter. But on the upside, after taking her to court, Peaches did receive restitution for the woman's actions, which paid for her dental work. But yet, Nikki would still feel a way about it. Everyone around always knew not to mess with Peaches. So this is out of the norm to view her baby sister as a victim. It's now the year 2006, and Peaches is 25 years old. Songs like Lean With It, Rock With It by them Franchise Boys, It's Going Down by Young Jock, and Grills by Nelly had the streets on fire. But nothing like the song Riding Dirty by Chamillionaire, which was #1 on the charts. The Blu-ray disc for DVDs was just released. Google just purchased YouTube. Sony released the PS3. And we can't forget when Motorola released that new Razr flip phone. A lot of those things may bring up some of the most memorable times ever, a year to remember for everyone, and Peaches would be among those that were enjoying it. But before the year could turn over into the next, she would experience an event that she'd never forget. Even though Peaches wasn't close with her biological father growing up, it would come a time where she'd build stronger bonds with her siblings in the future. Which brings us to the night of December 15th, 2006, when Peaches and her younger sister from her father's side had a night out on the town. Now, for the sake of the video, we'll refer to her sister as Pam. And Pam would be in contact with the male stripper named Robertson, who went by the stage name X-Rated. After partying at a club where Robinson and his friends were dancing, Pam and Peaches arranged to meet them at a gas station on Superior Avenue. Before the meet, Pam picked up her best friend, who we refer to as Robin. And the plan from here was to get something to eat, then go to Robin's apartment to have a little kickback. So pulling off in 3 cars deep, there was Peaches, her sister Pam, Pam's friend Robin, accompanied by Robinson and his 3 friends Duckworth, Knott, and Page. But before they could go back to the apartment, Robin needed to pick up the house keys from her grandmother's house. So Robinson and his guys followed the group of girls to a house on East 120th Street where her grandmother lived. Upon pulling up, Robin's brother, Carlos, sat inside a car parked in the driveway with his friend, Tevin, and all 3 cars would park across the street from the house, waiting for Robin's brother to give her the keys. The friend Tevin would exit the vehicle, walk over to a red van, and retrieved an item from the van. He then walked toward Robinson's vehicle. Tevin, who wore a jacket with the hood, also had a mask covering the lower half of his face. Robin, Pam, and Duckworth were standing outside the car when Tevin approached them and pulled out a gun. But Robin pushed the gun away and told her brother's friend to, and I quote, "Stop playing." Tevin then pushed her out of the way while saying, "Y'all know what it is. Run that shit." With the gun pointed in Duckworth's direction, he fires, shooting at Duckworth. Robinson, who's also the driver, tried pulling off, but was shot by Tevin, crashing into that red van in the process. Paige attempted to help Duckworth, but Tevin would chase him down, firing at him as well. So Pam, along with Peaches and Paige, drive to the gas station they had just left not too long ago to call the police. Meanwhile, the fourth member of the guys, Knott, would also exit the car to try and help Duckworth, but Duckworth just told him save himself and run. And as Knott ran away, Tevin, along with an unknown male, chased him down, shooting in his direction. While running, Knott managed to call 911, identifying the shooter as the taller of the two men chasing him. Now, unbeknownst to Peaches and the rest of her group, Tevin's girlfriend, Michelle, was inside the red van parked on the street. The same van Robinson crashed into after being shot. She had earlier accompanied Tevin to the area to cop some weed. After making a getaway, Michelle would call 911, ultimately making a false report that her van had been stolen, claiming that she had been carjacked at gunpoint, but that not being the only lie she would tell. She also later claimed to police that Robin's brother, Carlos, was the sole shooter. After all the smoke cleared, Peaches, distraught, clearly in shock, face full of tears while getting inside of a squad car, she was taken down to the station for questioning along with the others. And this would be the second ordeal of her life where a man lost his life in front of her. Now 5 to 6 months later down the line, going into the year 2007, Nikki gets a knock at the door. The man she was dating at the time would answer the door, finding out it's the police, who said they were looking for Nikki to talk about a murder. Her man, not knowing if she were in trouble or not, he'd say she wasn't there. So after informing Nikki about it, she rushes out to the porch before they could leave, wanting to know why she was being sought after, knowing she had no part in any murders for that matter. But they were actually looking for Shaletha, aka Peaches, her sister. And because her name was on a previous address of Nikki's, her house was the next best stop. But nothing would come from the visit, with Peaches never returning to the station after the day that it happened. Now sentencing day comes, and the jury recommended that Tevin be sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after serving 25 years of his sentence. It would take a while for Peaches to shake back from this ordeal, and she eventually did. But there was another reason she wasn't present at Nikki's house the day that the police came knocking, and that's because she was housed at a facility called University Manor for rehab, but not drug rehab. It was more so physical rehab. And this would be her new reality after coming into contact with the man in East Cleveland who she'd have a few beers with one day. Rewinding the story just a few weeks before being admitted, and as we know by now, Peaches would indulge into heavy drinking and drug use. The alcohol made her more aggressive, whereas though the drugs would make her overly nice. So when the two were combined, you could almost say she was at balance, so to speak. She'd meet up with a guy. They would sit on his porch for a while conversing, chilling, having a few beers. Time goes by and it's getting a little late, and Peaches figures it's time to go. She didn't know him too well, and this also wasn't that type of party for her. So as she stood up to leave, she pulled out a cigarette, patting her pockets. She then asked the guy if he had a lighter. He says yes, and as she waited, the cigarette hanging from her lips, the guy acting if he was reaching for his lighter, but struck Peaches down to the ground instead. After she hit the ground, he drug her by her legs into the house. Once inside, the words she'd hear next from the man in a calm but very assertive manner was, and I quote, "Bitch, you know what time it is. Take your motherfucking clothes off." And we can all admit that being in a situation like this, where you're drunk, high, and at a disadvantage of position, most won't survive it. But Peaches was very street smart, quick on her feet, and told the man she was gonna do it. She's gonna take off her clothes, but asked to let her catch her breath for a second. And so he did. And this was the moment she was looking for. So while still having a good grip on the Peaches, she returned the favor, grabbing onto him, pulling him down toward her, almost bear hugging him. And this was now fight or flight mode in real time, but Peaches chose to fight. This guy was bigger than her, but more so height than weight. While still holding on to him, making it hard for him to attack effectively, she then dragged herself along with him toward the nearest window. And after breaking free, she jumped out of the 2-story window, breaking her leg in 3 places on impact. She would then lay out in the driveway, screaming for help for a good amount of time before anyone lended a hand. Peaches was also well known to local authorities, and because of her reputation, a patrol car on duty would just drive past this woman who was almost assaulted or worse, but someone would eventually call emergency services for her, and it's the luck of the draw that he decided to stay inside and not finish the job. A situation that was almost similar to her mother's years back when she was almost stabbed to death inside of that apartment building. So during her time at the facility, she'd meet a guy who would get her pregnant, and by year 2008, her 3rd baby boy was born. But unfortunately, she wasn't ready to take on responsibility as a mother again because of her erratic lifestyle. And just as her last 2 baby boys, Child Protective Services would gain custody of him. But the only upside you could dig out of this situation was the father's willingness to be a factor in that child's life. So after the day of his birth, CPS wouldn't keep him long because the father stepped up to raise him himself. Peaches loved her boys, all 3 of them, but she knew the life that she led would just put them at risk or cause trauma that could have been avoided. 2 years after her brush with death, she was still living in her own apartment on Terrace, and Peaches and her sister Nikki would see a news clip talking about a serial killer in Cleveland, Ohio named Anthony Sowell, a man who was alleged to have killed 11 women, which authorities think his number of victims were a lot more. Anthony Sowell hunted women of a certain type, and those were the mothers who roamed the streets, drug abused, prostitutes, and alcoholics, and he would lure them into his home where they'd be raped, then murdered after by strangulation. As they sat there listening to the horror this man dished out, his identity would grace the TV screen, and Nikki would say she'll never forget the look on her sister's face after seeing that clip.
I remember talking to my sister and the look on her face when that news clip came on. I remember her saying, "Nikki, that is him. That's him. That's the one that did that shit to me."
What happened in this house behind me is simply a nightmare, and there are a lot of deeply disturbing questions for authorities here. There were 6 bodies found in this house last week. This morning, we know there are more.
We discovered 4 additional, what we believe to be 4 bodies.
Police believe that they were murdered by this man, Anthony Sowell, a convicted rapist who had been living in the house.
It appears that this man had a insatiable appetite that he had to fill.
5 of the bodies have been identified as women. Police say they were strangled.
I didn't feel safe. There's something telling me, don't go in this house.
One woman says she narrowly avoided being a victim.
How he was in love with me, how he wanted me to go up to his house and drink with him.
Sowell was a registered sex offender, and this tragedy raises questions about how closely he had been monitored by police.
Probation and parole is not really set up to be a law enforcement outfit. They're not set up to do the type of surveillance and supervision that might catch somebody like this guy.
The search of this house will continue. Chris, there could be still more bodies here.
And as we touched on not too long ago, Peaches had a reputation. So in her mind, there was no point in pressing the issue about him at that time. And this wasn't just true for Peaches, because a few women have come forward to report Anthony Sowell, but their cries were taken lightly. And who knows, maybe her report might have ruffled some feathers a bit more, but the mentality toward poor, homeless, drug-addicted in the black community were all thrown into a general category of non-urgency. But now knowing she was just inches away from becoming a notch on the Cleveland Strangler's belt was as terrifying as it gets for anyone. But life goes on.
Talk, no comment though, just paper chase. Chasing my dreams, my nightmares ain't got no money. Just a cardboard sign and they existing so bummy. And they want me down with them at the bottom of the barrel. I don't want no parts of it. For that life I